Open up the door, it's Dave! Who?
The Walt Disney Company finds itself in a very interesting position these days. For many years, the company had done really, really well. From the time that Michael Eisner left as the CEO until about the time of the pandemic, things were going great for the company. Things were really growing. You could see that they had really a great market share. They had a lot of brand identity and awareness, and people really wanted to be a part of that. And you could make the case that they were growing so much that it was kind of crazy. So Bob Iger comes in after Michael Eisner, and he's a good CEO, and he's running the company really well. And for many years, things are going well. He's got all these different investments and things he's got going on. And then he makes a decision that he wants to start gaining on intellectual property. He wants to start buying things out. So he buys the Star Wars franchise for arguably too much money. He also bought the 20th Century Fox properties, which was an enormous thing to put into the portfolio. He buys the Marvel Universe for arguably too much money. He buys some other properties, and things are kind of different, right? He's spending a lot of money to get involved in things that make no sense in the global perspective of the company. The company spends around $1 billion to create something that they called FastPass Plus, which was an enhancement to what they were doing as far as getting people into the theme parks. And I'll do a particular video about that another time, but it's kind of an interesting perspective that they spent so much money on that, and then they just discarded it recently. So there was a lot of investment that was made. Not all of it was fantastic. Most of it was really good, but a little bit of it was on the negative side. Now, you can make the case that Bob Iger probably 2 or 3 times during his tenure should have retired. There were a couple of occasions where he had reached his pinnacle and probably should have stepped aside. There were many people who worked for the Disney company who would have been really good the next CEOs, the people he could have groomed to be the CEO. Several of them thought they were going to be that guy or that woman, and when they weren't, they wound up leaving and going somewhere else, which is kind of an interesting thing to have happen because the Walt Disney Company prides itself on people who are grown from within, people who understand the company and really can motivate it to a large degree because they understand what the company's perspective is on things. But he didn't promote any of those people to CEO, didn't put them as the people that he wanted to have next. And that was kind of a problem. So it became something he had to deal with. And as we got into 2019, he was ready to step aside, and he did start to make succession plans. But his succession plans were maybe a little haphazard, maybe not as well thought out as they could have been. And he tapped Bob Chapek to be the next CEO of the company. Now, Bob had been with the company for a long time. Bob had been with the parks and whatever, but Bob maybe wasn't the right guy to be in the succession plan for Disney. And then along comes the pandemic. And the pandemic decimated Disney's core businesses. You had theme parks, you had entertainment, and you had sports. Those are the 3 major things that Disney's involved in. And all 3 of them were impacted by the fact that there was a pandemic going on and people weren't going out. Now, I would argue that the theme parks were the biggest impact because they were closed and they had to take out ginormous loans in order to pay off some of their debts and keep things going because they paid their cast members for some period of time, and there were some other real estate things that they had to pay for, upkeep and maintenance and things like that they had to create they weren't generating any revenue on. Now, as far as entertainment goes, there was kind of a messy and complex thing that happened, especially with distributing movies, because you couldn't distribute movies to the theaters because the theaters weren't open, and the actors were upset because they weren't getting the same royalties based on the movies. Scarlett Johansson famously filed a lawsuit against Disney. And then as far as sports goes, with no sports ongoing for a short period of time, it made it really difficult to make money on sports. And then what you saw was as people were staying home more, they realized that they could cut the cord, as it were, get away from cable TV and go to streaming. When you get away from cable TV, Disney is losing about $4 per subscriber for every subscriber on every cable system in the entire United States. So if your cable bill was $70, $4 of that was going to Disney. Think about that for a minute. But as people were cutting the cord, that money wasn't coming in. And meanwhile, these contracts and these negotiations are getting ramped up to pay more money, to spend more for Disney to get the rights to air some and broadcast some games. So it got more and more expensive all the time for Disney. So Disney kind of found itself in a tough spot. And Iger steps away, Chapek takes over. Chapek does some interesting things that maybe aren't in the best interests of shareholders. The board of directors decides at the end of 2022 that Chapek is not the right guy after a little less than 2 years, and they fire him, and they bring back Iger, which goods and bads go with that. What they say is in the industry that your second run is never as good as your first, and you always have problems. It's just the way it works out. And it's unfortunate, but it seems to be the case. So here comes Bob Iger back, and he's like, I got to right the ship. I got to fix some things that I set wrong. And it's a difficult environment. Everything's hard. Like I said, all of these properties, everything's going on, and he's focused so much on intellectual property, and they have so much debt they have to pay back that things are almost impossible. And their stock price is doing very poorly by comparison with where it was pre-pandemic. So along comes this billionaire named Nelson Peltz. And Nelson says, you know what? I want a seat on the board. I want to say in how the Disney company is running because I don't think it's running right. Disney fends him off at least 2 times previously, but then more recently, Nelson Peltz came back with Jay Rasulo, who used to be, I believe, was the I think the highest thing he ever had was the president of Disney Parks, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not positive about that, but he actually came back and he joined with Nelson Peltz, and the two of them took their shares, whatever they had in the company, and then the shares of Trian, which is a company that Nelson Peltz runs. It's an investment company. Also included in this portfolio are the shares that are owned by Ike Perlman. Ike used to be the head of Marvel Studios before he and Bob Iger had a falling out, and he wound up leaving the company. So he's got a little bitter taste in his mouth. Plus, he's got some interesting political connections that are very different than what Iger has, so keep that in mind. So the whole Marvel thing comes into play again, right? You see how this kind of circles back around. And you have this whole thing happening. And they want seats on the board of directors because what they see is the opportunity to change the direction of the company, to make it more profitable. One of the complaints about Bob Chapek was that he went too woke. And I use the air quotes here when I talk about things like that because it's not really fair to use that word. But that was one of the complaints that you heard about him, was that he was trying to drive the company in a weird direction where it was all about that. And Peltz agrees that that was a problem, that there was spending too much time and effort and energy on things that didn't affect the bottom line. Well, maybe they adversely affected the bottom line. That's kind of what he was saying. So he wants a couple of seats on the board. So he's looking to oust 2 board members and get some seats on the board. Disney, for their part, decided, you know what, we're going to appoint 2 people to the board because they had 2 open board seats, and we're going to change the rules on how people get appointed so he can't be involved in this. So Peltz said, well, okay, I'll make it a proxy fight then. And he's put out a proxy statement. He put a memorandum together. So he has the legal remedy to do this. And he's basically saying, I want to remove these 2 board members and add these 2 board members. And so this is an interesting twist in the Disney company because he sees it as the direction is wrong. And by putting new board members in, we could change the direction and change course. And I find that really intriguing. The idea is really kind of interesting that he's got this in mind. So he's got that going on. Meanwhile, there's another investment banking firm called Blackwell that came along and they said, you know what? We agree that the company is not running well, but we don't agree with Nelson Peltz. What we think is that we should be doing something different, and the company is just too big as it is, and it should be split off into 2 or 3 different companies. We have to evaluate that, but it should be several different companies. One for real estate, one for theme parks, one for entertainment, one for sports, whatever. But they want to break it up into many companies. And they think that's the answer. So their suggestion is to put together a proxy statement as well and say, we want to have 3 board members added, a different 3, and have those board members become board members that will help guide us to the idea of breaking this company up into smaller entities that can then each be profitable in their own way rather than being this behemoth. They realize that one of the problems is that Disney, with a single CEO over that sort of size of the property, the entirety of the Disney company, it's impossible. No one person can manage it. Bob Chapek proved that pretty thoroughly, and I think Bob Iger is just reinforcing it, that it's just impossible to run a company of this size. It's just too big, too diverse, there's too many things going on, and it's impossible to run it that way. So the goal is to break it up into separate companies. Now, Disney is trying to fend this off completely. Disney produced an earnings report in the first quarter that showed that they were making more money, their stock price went up, they beat the expectations, all of these things are good. They also acquired the company that created Fortnite, I think it's Epic Gaming. And then they also signed on with Taylor Swift to have the Eras tour that was in video or was filmed and was actually showing in the theaters to be on Disney Plus starting in March. So, they've done some good things. Now, the other problem is Disney Plus. It's an impossible thing to keep that running the way it is. It's just people can come and go as they please, so you can't do any forecasting. You can't figure out how many people are going to be subscribing. Somebody may subscribe for a month at, whatever it is, $6 or $7 a month, and then they cancel it at the end of the month. So you made the $7 on them, and they got to watch all the content they could for 30 days. But what do you do about that, right? How do you manage that? So it's an impossible thing for them to manage at this point. They try to keep people there. They try to give them some encouragement by giving you some discounts and other things, or you can buy a year in advance and all these things that make it better. But I think them and all of the other streaming properties have the same problem, right? It's just impossible to keep that running. So, that's a small term win, but I don't think it's a long-term win as far as like having Taylor Swift in there. So the Disney company is kind of stuck. So now here's where things get more interesting, because as a shareholder, you are sent 3 potential proxy ballots that you can have. They're calling it the white one, that's the Disney one. They're calling it the blue one, and that's the one that is the Nelson Peltzback one. And then there's the green one, that's actually the one that's from Blackwell. And they're really funny about it, because when you go to the 3 different sites, everybody set up their site to talk about what they have. And they're talking about all these different things that they're planning for. The Peltz Group has a website called restorethemagic.com where they talk about what they're doing. The Blackwell Group is thefutureofdisney.com. Meanwhile, Disney is running the one votedisney.com. So you can go and visit each of those to find out more. VoteDisney.com is the one that's the Disney company, and they've got Ludwig von Drake helping you to decide that you should vote on the white proxy statement, and the other 2 tell you to vote on the other ones. Now, as a shareholder, you can own 1 share or you can own 1 million shares. It doesn't matter. You get a vote. All the votes get tallied, and the winner gets the seats on the board, whatever's going to happen there, whatever the outcome is. So it's an interesting thing that happens if you're, within the proxy statement, you're basically saying that you want to retain the board members or remove them. So that's what it amounts to. And whatever happens is going to happen. Now, in general, it's unlikely that Nelson Peltz will win. I think it's extremely unlikely that Blackwell will win. But I think Nelson Peltz at least has a chance. Given what he's saying and what he wants to do, I think I agree in general that they could be more profitable. I think there's many opportunities there that are just being missed. And I think the fact that Disney doesn't have a very specific succession plan at this point still is a little bit concerning. You need to be thinking about who your next CEO is going to be. It was supposed to be that Bob Iger came back for just 1 year, 18 months, 2 years. And now it's like 3 years. And it's like, wait a minute, when are you going to actually plan to have someone else come in? Why not bring back someone to the company who you wanted as a successor? Why not change what you're doing a little bit, change the paradigm, instead of just saying, yeah, we'll figure it out? Because it's very vague right now. They're going to figure it out. When? When are you going to figure it out? You've had a year already, year and a half now, and when are you going to figure it out? But I know that Disney is a little bit scared, I'll use the word scared, of what's going to happen here, because they decided to not have the board meeting where they do the voting in person. Their annual meeting is not going to be in person this year. It's going to be a virtual meeting, totally online, and you vote online. And that's an interesting twist, because normally they would have it in person, but because it's contentious, they decided not to have it that way. I think they're hoping that they can help curry favor and make things work out the way they want them to, and perhaps they can. But at least for now, it kind of looks like, wait a minute, this is a little strange that they're doing this. I just find the whole thing really fascinating. As a longtime fan of the Disney company and a one-time cast member, and I like to throw that in there once in a while, I have a perspective on the company. You may have a completely different perspective, but I just wanted to share that with you because I find the whole thing just fascinating at this point. There's so much happening and so many moving parts that it's worth spending a couple of minutes on. So anyway, good luck to Disney and the Disney company, and good luck to all the people who are involved in this. One way or another, it'll end on April 3rd. They'll count the votes, and that'll be the end of it. And wherever we go from here is just fine. I mean, it'll work out one way or another. So anyway, have a great day, and talk to you soon.
What's your point, David?